January 1994. In a quiet forest in upstate New York, detectives began digging through the frozen ground. A few minutes later, the first white bones started to surface. They belonged to a 16-year-old girl. For 7 years, no one knew she was there. But what made the discovery even more disturbing was how close she had been all along. Her grave was less than 200 feet from the home of a man named Robert Jones. Every summer, Robert, his wife, and their 2 young children came back to that same stretch of woods. They brought a cooler, spread out a blanket, prepared food, and spent quiet afternoons together while the children laughed and ran through the grass. There was one terrifying coincidence no one noticed for years. The area where the Jones family gathered to eat, relax, and make memories was the same ground where detectives would later uncover her remains. Her name was Kari Lynn Nixon. On the night of June 22, 1987, Kari left home for a quick trip to a neighborhood store just a few blocks away. It should have taken only a few minutes, but Kari never made it back. That's right. What began as a simple run to a neighborhood grocery store became the start of a 7-year nightmare. It all started on the evening of June 22, 1987, a quiet summer night. Everything seemed normal. There was no warning that within minutes, the Nixon family's world would be shattered forever. Around 9:30 p.m., Gary Nixon asked his 16-year-old daughter to run over to Thomas's country store. Just a quick errand, one she had done countless times before. Before leaving, Kari tucked her own savings back into her dresser. She took only the $20 her father handed her. Then she walked out the front door. No suitcase, no extra clothes, no note. Nothing suggested she was planning to leave her life behind. At 9:55 p.m., Kari left the store. The clerk remembered her smile. She was just her usual self. She picked up her bag and started walking home. At 10:05 p.m., a neighbor spotted her on the familiar road just minutes from home. That was the last confirmed sighting. Minutes later, a group of teenagers walked that same path. They were close behind her, and yet Kari was gone. No screams, no struggle, no suspicious cars, nothing that made anyone stop. The night remained eerily quiet. In the span of just a few minutes, Kari Lynn Nixon had simply vanished. By morning, as the sun rose over an empty bedroom, the Nixons knew this was not a delay. It was a disappearance, and the largest search their small town had ever seen was about to begin. Within hours, the entire community was searching for Kari. Police officers, firefighters, hundreds of volunteers. Search dogs followed the last scent they could find. Teams combed through forests, riverbanks, abandoned buildings, and every remote corner surrounding the town. Every passing hour brought the same unanswered question. Where was Kari Lynn Nixon? But despite the massive search effort, there was nothing. No personal belongings, no footprints, no physical evidence. Nothing that could explain what had happened to the 16-year-old girl. As the investigation began to lose momentum, Kari's friends remembered something they had never considered important. Over the years, Kari had written them several letters about leaving town one day. At first, she dreamed of Hawaii. Later, it was Florida. Then, in her most recent letter, she wrote that when she turned 18, she wanted to move to California and start a new life. For a brief moment, investigators considered the possibility that Kari had left on her own. But the facts didn't support it. She hadn't taken her savings. She packed no clothes. She left behind no note. And she never told anyone she planned to disappear that night. Time moved on, but the Nixon family refused to give up hope. Then one day, something extraordinary happened. While watching a nationally televised music festival from California, the very place Kari had dreamed of moving to, Gary and his wife froze. Among thousands of faces in the crowd, they saw a young woman who looked remarkably like Kari. For a moment, they believed their daughter was still alive. Investigators quickly tracked down the lead, but once again, hope gave way to heartbreak. The young woman on television wasn't Kari. Months turned into years. The calls slowed, the leads disappeared, and the investigation gradually faded into the background. By the beginning of 1994, Kari Lynn Nixon's disappearance had become what many feared it would always remain: a cold case. Early January 1994. By then, Kari Lynn Nixon's disappearance had been a cold case for nearly 7 years. Most people believed the truth would never be found. Then, something completely unexpected happened. A bank robbery in Glens Falls, New York, led police to a man named Robert Jones. At first, it looked like nothing more than another armed robbery. No one imagined it had anything to do with a teenage girl who had vanished all those years earlier. But as detectives began questioning those involved, the investigation took an unexpected turn. One of Robert's accomplices agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for leniency. What he revealed went far beyond the robbery itself. Not long afterward, Robert's wife also agreed to give investigators a statement. For the first time in years, detectives heard a name they had not heard in a very long time: Kari Lynn Nixon. The cold case was immediately reopened. Investigators confronted Robert Jones. He denied having anything to do with Kari's disappearance, but as the statements from those closest to him began to line up, Robert finally agreed to lead investigators to a wooded area near his home. He told them they would find Kari there.
Robert Jones kept his word. Under police escort, he led detectives into a wooded area near his home. After walking only a short distance, he stopped. Without saying a word, he pointed to a patch of ground. The search team began to dig. Within minutes, white bones started to emerge from the soil. 7 years of unanswered questions were finally coming to an end. A forensic examination later confirmed what everyone had feared. The remains belonged to Kari Lynn Nixon. But that discovery was only the beginning. Faced with the evidence, Robert finally revealed what had happened on the night of June 22, 1987. He was 23 years old. After spotting Kari walking home alone, he pulled out a handgun and forced her into his vehicle. He then drove her to his family's farm, where he sexually assaulted and murdered her. He later transported Kari's body to a secluded wooded area and buried her in a shallow grave, believing no one would ever find her. But what happened afterward stunned even veteran detectives. Not long after Kari's disappearance, he and his wife moved into a house less than 200 feet from the grave. Over the following years, Robert repeatedly brought his wife and children to that very spot for weekend picnics. His children laughed and played. They grilled food together. They enjoyed afternoons outdoors, completely unaware of what lay beneath their feet. Just beneath them lay the remains of the girl an entire town had spent 7 years searching for. After 7 years, Kari had finally come home. For the Nixon family, the search was finally over. For Robert Jones, everything was just beginning. With Kari's remains finally recovered, a case that had haunted a community for 7 years was finally headed to court. During the investigation, Robert claimed that he had been overwhelmed with anger after learning his wife had been unfaithful. Prosecutors rejected that explanation outright. Nothing, they argued,
could ever justify what he had done to Kari Lynn Nixon. Rather than face a lengthy trial, Robert accepted a plea agreement. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison for the crimes related to Kari's murder. However, that sentence was ordered to run concurrently with the 15-year sentence he was already serving for the bank robbery. In practical terms, it meant he would serve only about 3 additional years for Kari's murder. The decision sparked immediate public outrage. Kari's family, along with many members of the community, believed the sentence fell far short of justice. To them, 7 years of pain, 7 years of unanswered questions, could never be measured by just a few extra years behind bars. Even so, Robert Jones would never walk free. To this day, he remains behind bars in a New York state prison. For the Nixon family, no sentence could ever bring Kari back. But after 7 long years, they finally knew what had happened to their daughter. Sometimes, justice cannot erase the pain, but it can finally give a family the truth they have waited a lifetime to hear.